Campfire Classics is a classic literature podcast. However, your hosts will occasionally use not-so-classy language and immature humor to describe very mature situations. As such, listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Ken Sandberg.
And I'm Heather Michelle Lawler.
Welcome to Campfire Classics, where we try to read those books that look really good on your shelf.
Not my best vocal, but you know, what are you gonna do?
It's early. It was pingy.
It's early, and I have not stopped singing those songs or even dreaming about those songs since we saw the movie yesterday. So, happy Wicked Week, y'all.
For those who celebrate.
For those who celebrate, and I will be celebrating from now on. So, I'll see y'all next year for part 2. Yeah,
Which is a year away.
It is a year away. But if you have seen Wicked, you understand. If you haven't yet, you should. That's all.
It was very good.
Phenomenal.
I have to confess, after having seen the previews and whatnot, I went in with very low expectations. I found the marketing to be disappointing to watch, but it's really very good.
It's so good.
If you are at all a fan of that type of movie, it's well worth the check it out.
Woo! I am changed forever. I'm changed for good, in fact. But yeah. Anyway, that's what that was one of the big events of this past couple days that we've had. So yeah. I'm literally like, all my algorithms are just Wicked now. Like, I'm scrolling through TikTok or like Instagram, and it's just all Wicked content. So I have boxed myself into a little Wicked box, which
those are really dangerous, because what they do is you start rabbit holing, and then it feeds your already rabbit hole obsession, so it becomes very whirlpool, quicksand.
Yes, like the Deadly Desert in Oz: The Return to Oz. Yes, this is my mind now. We're fucked.
Whereas my algorithm of late has turned into nothing but Neil deGrasse Tyson videos.
Yes, which is a fun combo.
lots of science-y things, which is why I'm actually kind of surprised that it took one of our listeners writing in to answer the question, how do snakes pee?
Yes. Ken read this to me the other day. I just want to know, before you share it with everyone else, I'm not going to share it. I shared this fact with my entire work team doing standardized patient work, and they were like, oh my gosh. So enjoy. Here we go.
So snakes urinate through a cloaca, which is what I said I thought it was.
Yeah,
it
like
is the everything hole.
The everything hole.
If you listen to last week's episode entitled The Everything Hole.
Was that just last week?
Yeah.
Oh my God. It feels like it was like at least 2 weeks ago.
Which is a single opening at the end of their belly and the beginning of their tail. This is also used for defecating and laying eggs and mating and basically everything except eating.
The everything hole.
However, snakes' urine is called urates, and it's like a yellowish white chalky powdery granule. It's a solid that comes out along with their feces, because snakes don't have a urinary bladder, so it doesn't get mixed in with any liquid. So basically, how do snakes pee? They don't.
They don't. And like, all I can see when their quote unquote pee is described is like a hamster pellet. like The pellets you feed hamsters.
I don't think it comes out that big.
Okay.
I think it's more like sand.
Oh,
like
okay.
it's tiny little. I hope.
I was imagining this little like hamster pellets like of pee.
Yeah. Also, apparently, snakes are incredibly efficient at digestion, which is part of why there isn't much left. So when they swallow their prey, and if you've seen those pictures of like snakes with the bump that is the entire fucking rat they just ate in their belly,
or if you're looking at an anaconda, the entire alligator they swallowed.
Yeah. They're apparently they slowly digest and absorb like almost everything, bones and all. They suck every bit of mineral and vitamin and whatnot out of it. So they're all in addition to just not being able to process pee, there also just isn't much for them to get rid of.
Yeah, they don't need to process pee because they are not water-based creatures like we are, and they get all the water they need out of their food.
Yeah, well, they pass things differently.
Yeah.
Although, as we learned a couple weeks ago, many of them are water based, which is fucking horrifying.
Water based as in they live in water, but not water based as in they need to consume water to survive, kind of like us. But yeah, kind of those are fun facts. We like that. Yes.
So that's a checkup from last week. But let's get into this week's episode. So here at Campfire Classics, we cold read short stories. We deliver them to you sight unseen, and we try to make our way through them. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it's really kind of embarrassing.
Yeah. I was like, is it embarrassing? Yeah, we're pretty embarrassing.
There are often accidental penis jokes and not so accidental fart jokes and lots of dirty talk and blue humor from us, your hosts. Anyway, Heather has chosen a story for me to read this week, but before we jump into the story, she's going to give us a few fun facts to set the stage for what we are about to listen to.
It is the time for fun facts. Doodly dee dee dee. Okay, so this week we have a new writer again, which is exciting.
Yay!
That just keeps happening. So I would like to introduce you to G.B. Stern.
G.B. Stern.
G.B. Stern.
G.B. Stern.
You should be stern in life because you gotta be in this shit show that we're dealing with.
Sternness is important.
It is indeed. But you might not know that G.B. Stern is a woman. Her name is Gladys Browning Stern. So, and she was actually born Gladys Bertha Stern. She
Good name.
didn't want to have a middle name Bertha, I guess. You know what? I get that. Totally get that.
Bertha at birth.
Bertha at birth, Browning at death. Yeah, actually. So she was born June 17th, day after my sister, 1890.
Day after your sister.
Yes. Ashley's aging very well. G.B. Stern was born, as I said, the 17th of June, 1890 in North Kensington, London. So she was, had a couple siblings and was of Jewish descent. And her father was actually pretty successful until they lost all of their money in a diamond crash. Kind of like, like the gold rush or the stock market crash. Yeah.
But for sparkly things.
Yes, for sparkly things. So they
I hate when sparkles crash.
I know. So they actually ended up moving from basically renting. They basically lived, the life most of us do, especially if we live in cities. And they lived around London in apartments, hotels, boarding houses. And so Gladys kind of lived her life until she was 16 with her parents. And then they decided to travel as much as they could, given, their financial issues. So they went to Germany for a while. I'm glad as Jewish people, they went to Germany in the early 1900s and not later.
Sure.
And then they went smartly to Switzerland. So she did experience a little bit of the world, younger. And And she actually started writing at a very young age, always loved writing, and published her first novel called Pantomime in 1914 at the age of 24.
Required to be read silently.
Yes, you must. It actually is done completely through a game of charades.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a picture book.
Yeah. The first picture book novel that ever existed.
I suppose, a picture novel, which is really just hieroglyphics.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's like going real old school.
Or real new school.
Like bringing it hipster style again.
It's a novel written entirely in emojis.
You know what? I would not be fucking surprised if there isn't already one. So that book went well, but her first quote unquote critical success came with a novel called Twos and Threes in 1916, which she upgraded from a picture book to a counting book. So
Sure, yeah. It's early Dr. Seuss here.
Yeah.
One fish, two fish, goy fish, two fish.
So her most popular books were a series that she wrote called, the first being The Matriarch. So clearly about a mother or a grandmother or,
a queen,
a woman in charge. She published a lot of books throughout her life, a lot of short stories, as all of the writers of this time do, because they tend to pay the most money up front.
Mm-hmm.
So her series of The Matriarch was a series of, I think, 5 books. And it revolved around the Rockonitz and Cheslavar families, which in a way sounds like New Jersey Jewish Sopranos. It's like the Rockonitz and the Cheslavar families. And it was actually very loosely, but not so loosely, based on her own family. Gotta write what you know.
Sure.
They were a well-to-do cosmopolitan Jewish family who settled in England from Hungary, Poland, Russia, and Austria. So kind of, and much like her own family, they suffered through an economic crash. And it centers around 2 characters, the matriarch, named Anastasia, of all people.
Anastasia Beaverhausen, sure.
Anastasia Beaverhausen, and her grandmother, Tony
Beaverhausen.
Tony Seslavar. Actually, the more I read this, the more I'm like, yes, it does sound like a Sopranos situation. But the women are in charge, which is fucking cool.
Sure.
The book describes, as I said, there's 5 books, but it goes through everything, details and complications, the noisy life of a Jewish English family through triumphs and failures, weddings and funerals. So very much a, snapshot of her life.
Cool.
She also wrote plays. She wrote a few quite successful plays.
We love theater writers.
Yeah. One of them was called The Man Who Pays the Piper in 1931, and that was actually revived by the Orange Tree Theatre in London in 2013.
Oh.
So it's still around, clearly. She wrote a biography about Robert Louis Stevenson, and also edited volumes of his work. And she also, her final novel was Promise Not to Tell, and was published in 1964.
Secrets are lies.
Secrets are lies. She had a few of her stories turned into movies. So in 1934, Long Lost Father was adapted into a film by the same title by RKO Pictures. In 1947, The Woman in the Hall was released as a film by the same title. And in 1966, her novel, The Ugly Douche Dosh, I can never say this fucking word. It's the wiener dog.
Dachshund.
The Ugly Dachshund, which I feel like is I'm trying to think of an ugly dachshund. They're so cute.
Right, which is why it's probably just the ugly duckling, but dogs.
Oh. So
it's an ugly dachshund because it's a chihuahua.
Yo quiero Taco Bell. And so that was The Ugly Dachshund was made into a film also by the same title. So she had 3 of her stories made into movies before she died. So that's making the money.
I mean, especially impressive, not for nothing, for
a British woman.
For someone who grew up before movies became talkies.
Well, that's the thing is like, and I think all of these were, well, the first one may have been.
Well, it could have been either or at that point. Yeah.
But then definitely the 47 and 66. I mean, those are that's like golden age of Hollywood right there.
Yeah. Well, because by the end of the 30s, you've got Wizard of Oz. You've got not just talkies, but musicals in full color.
Don't bring up Wizard of Oz. I'm going to get distracted again. Let's not try to find gravity. Okay, so a little bit more about her, and then we'll dive right into the story. Is she actually married a New Zealander, which is wild because she was living in England. So I mean, they, his name was Geoffrey Liesel Holdsworth, which is the most British name I've ever heard. I guess New Zealand New Zealand and Australia were just, the holdovers from England. They married in 1919 and they divorced very soon after. She had a lot of close friends that were men that were playwrights, and she had a very close friend named Rebecca West who came to call her, like as in GB, Peter. So there's some, ideas that maybe she liked the ladies. I mean, it was long before we were allowed to talk about such things.
Possibly.
She was raised Jewish. She actually wasn't super religious and ended up converting to Catholicism later in her life, which she wrote a book about. But even then, she wasn't super religious. She just kind of did it. I'm guessing because it had something to do with World War II, and so she could,
Yeah. Well, and probably a sort of I've never identified with the faith of my parents, so I'm going to pick something else.
Something else.
Because picking something else was
Catholic is a
easier
big jump,
than,
though.
I mean, no bigger than going atheist.
Well, I would argue that going atheist is just being I just don't believe anything, whereas going from Jewish to Catholic, those are some strong opinion.
I don't know.
There's an entire other book.
Yeah, but you've got a stern deity. You've got boatloads of guilt. You've got stereotypically overbearing parents.
All right, sure. I don't know the details, but I was like, what a weird leap.
Although
especially if she was leaning towards the ladies.
Yeah.
Why Catholicism? Because they have very, very openly been anti that for a long time. So
as has most of society.
As most society.
Although they're all wrong. If she's got her special lady friend and most of her close acquaintances calling her Peter, it sounds like she
might identify as a they or something. Yeah. Who knows? We cannot say from
Given the opportunity in today's culture.
And goes by GB instead of, I mean, that was not an uncommon thing in artists of trying to, get through life without causing a stir while still living their life authentically. So, but she, other than that, I mean, lived a pretty, normal life. No, big dramas or anything. And she died in Wallingford, Oxfordshire, She died in Wallingford, Oxford, England. Oxfordshire. I'm glad I'm not reading today. I'm wicketed out. On September 28th, 1973. And she was 83 years old. And there are actually 4 portraits of her in the National Portrait Gallery in London.
Oh, shit.
So,
cool.
She did all right. So, today...
Good for you, GB.
GB, living the life. You're going to be reading a story by G.B. Stern entitled The Stranger Woman. And that was first published in 1922 in the John O. London's Weekly. Let's do it.
Johnny O. London.
Johnny O. London's Weekly. Yes.
Yeah, let's start this fire. The Stranger Woman by G.B. Stern. After Hal Burnham had banged himself with his usual vigor,
That might be the best opening line
Strong start.
Strong start.
Well, but the thing is, like, good for
Hal.
you. If you're gonna, you may as well use some vigor.
If you're gonna bang yourself, you might as well use your vigor. And apparently he usually uses this. This is like his go-to.
Yeah, great.
Good job, Hal Burnham. You bang yourself with vigor. That's amazing. Wow. All right, that was the end, right?
That's it. That's
okay.
the whole story.
Cool. Thank you for joining us. This has been Campfire Classics.
I mean, it's not going to top that.
I challenge accepted, GB Stern.
After Hal Burnham had banged himself with his usual vigor... Fuck. It's English spelling. The word vigor had OU. It confused me.
I actually almost went through this document and changed some of the British spelling.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at this first paragraph. We've got vigor, favorite, and sombre.
And you can see them because they're underlined.
They're underlined.
This word is like, what is this?
What the fuck is it?
Where
This
the
is
fuck
America,
are you?
damn it.
Where are you? Get out of here.
Anyway, after Hal Burnham had banged himself with his usual vigor out of the house, Dickie sat quite unconsolably staring in front of him at a favorite picture on his wall.
Oh my God, it's killing me. What?
I mean, that is what happens when you finish banging yourself vigorously.
But now the other guy is staring at the wall of his favorite picture, which I can only assume what the picture is of.
Dickie
is
sitting there.
Yes, Dickie is sitting there staring at his favorite picture on the wall.
Yeah.
What kind of establishment is this?
Anyway.
Damn. We haven't even gotten to the end of a sentence yet.
Do we need to keep riffing on that, or shall I continue?
I think we can continue.
Inconsolable Dick sitting at the...
Staring
Anyway.
at a picture on the wall.
His favorite picture. A dim, somber effect of keys and masts and intent, hurrying men. His neat little brows were pulled down in a worried frown. His childish mouth was puckered.
Okay, so we're boats? There's boats.
Yeah, it's a picture of men on boats.
Men on boats.
And I'm just saying that the description of Dickie continues to accurately describe what happens after some vigorous banging. Brows pulled down, looking worried, mouth looking all puckered.
So that was a vigorous and not the best way, I guess.
Well, I'm thinking about a particular little Dickie who might be looking a little beat up and puckered shortly afterwards.
The actual Dickie. Okay, I'm there now. Wow, guys, this
Welcome
one,
to the conversation.
That was the first sentence of the story.
Moving right along.
Moving right along.
Was it accurate and just what Hal had said, or simpler still, was it true? What you damn well need, Dickie old son, is a life in the raw. You're living in a lady's work box here.
Oh no! He's like, Dickie, you gotta get out and about. You're just stuck in the puss.
You're all raw in the box.
You're raw in the box. At least wrap it up. I mean, come on.
Oh, we're never going to make it through this story.
Yeah, this is great. I don't think we've had one that's this, like, whoa. from the, like, it's like, oh, damn. Oh, does she know what she's doing here?
We are, 4 sentences and 38 euphemisms in.
Yep. It can only go, I would say uphill from here, but it'll probably go downhill from here.
What you damn well need, Dickie old son, is life in the raw. You're living in a lady's work box here. It was a bludgeoning return for the courteous attention with which Dickie had that evening listened to his friend's experiences of travel, for Hal was not even a good raconteur. He started an anecdote by its point and roughly slapped in the scenery afterwards. He had likewise a habit of disconnecting his impressions from any sequence of time. Also, he exaggerated and forgot names and dates, and even occasionally lapsed into odd silence just when Dickie was offering himself receptively for a climax.
Jesus Christ. So he's a bad storyteller.
He's a bad storyteller, and he quits just on the edge of climax.
Blue balls. Poor Dickie.
And then the inevitable, well, and what have you been doing meanwhile?
This is like going to your high school reunion. And you
Yeah.
run into that guy, and he's just like, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, I don't know what the fuck you're saying. And then they're like, what have you been up to? Like, oh, do I get to talk now?
Oh, is it my turn?
It's mine? Okay, cool.
I honestly don't remember. Your story was so interesting.
I need to go bang myself with vigor.
Dickie was not in the least at a loss. He had refurnished his rooms to begin with, and that involved a diligent search in antique shops and at sale rooms and one or two trips across country in order to not miss a real gem. And they had to be ready for comfortable habitation before the arrival of Monsieur and Mademoiselle Saint-André for their annual stay with him, a delightful old pair, brother and sister with peppery manners and hypocritical appreciation of a good cuisine, but so poor, so really painfully poor, that, as Dickie delicately put it, I could not help knowing that it might make a difference to them if I postponed their visit of less trivial annoyance, but more vital in quality, than with other of my friends for whom I should therefore have hurried my preparations rather less. This is, in confidence, of course, my dear Hal. He had set himself to complete his collection of Watts's literary souvenirs. I have the whole 11 volumes now.
So we've had 2 stories in a row of these men who collect good antiques and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah. I hope he doesn't get a mummy's foot.
we'll see.
We'll find out.
I don't think a woman could get any stranger than the Egyptian princess that came about in the last.
That is true,
So.
but again, I guess challenge accepted.
I have the whole 11 volumes now, and he had been a guest at 2 charming house parties in the country, and at one of them had been given the full responsibility of rehearsing a comic opera in the late 18th century style. Amateurs, of course, but I was so bent on realizing the flavor, incorrectly spelled, the flavor of the period, that I'm indeed afraid that I did not draw a clear enough line between the deliciously robust and the obnoxiously coarse.
Okay, Gilmore Girls. It's like, it's amateur theater, but it's going to be freaking fabulous and definitely period appropriate. Not.
Coarse? You? Hal guffawed, and then out came the accusation which was so disturbing little Dickie. Life in the raw. Why did the phrase make him want to clear his throat? Raw. Yes, that was the association when you opened your mouth and the fog swirled in. Newsboys scampering along a foggy street that was neither elegant nor squalid, but just a street of mixed shops and mixed traffic and barrows lit with a row of flapping lights and men and women with faces that showed they worked hard to earn a little less than they needed. Public houses, butchers' shops with great slabs of red meat. Yes, and a queue outside the picture palace and a station. People bought the evening papers as they hurried in and out of the station. "Here you are, sir." And on the sheets were headlines that blared out all the most sordid crimes of the past 24 hours, ignored during a sober morning of politics and commerce, but dragged into bold view for the people's more leisured reading. Newsboys in a foggy street on a Saturday night. Thus was Dickie's first instinct to define life in the raw.
So basically like the streets of London, the streets of New York.
Yeah.
Just like the everyday man.
Yeah.
The everyday thing.
Then he discovered that this was only the archway, and that the crimes themselves were life in the raw, and the criminals. But one must get nearer by slow degrees, if at all. Hal had said that he was living in a lady's workbox. Dickie was sensitive. That'll happen.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
not at all stupid. His penetration
Jesus Christ.
was quite aware that Burnham's remark was not applied to the harmonizing shades of the walls between which he dwelt, nor the soft, mellow patterns of his silky Persian rugs, nor to his collections, heavens, how he collected, of glowing Sèvres china, or of Second Empire miniatures, of quaint old musical instruments with names that in themselves were a tender tinkle of a song, and of the shoes that had been worn by queens.
So yes, definitely a collector again.
He's a collector. Apparently he likes queens' shoes.
He likes queen shoes.
So we're dealing with a foot fetish
and
again.
Penetrating work boxes, ladies' work boxes. So, yep, foot fetish. The theme of November. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
All these things were merely accessories, his soul making neat, tiny gestures, shrugging its shoulders, pointing a toe. What Hal meant was that Dickie dared not live dangerously.
So you're just saying your life's too
Dude,
boring.
you're boring.
You're boring. You live in your house, you direct the opera for the amateur theater in town.
Yeah.
Like, you don't ever do anything exciting. You don't go on adventures.
What am I to do? He raised wistful, light brown eyes to the picture, which was the one incongruous touch to the dainty perfection of his octagonal sitting room. He had bought it at a rummage sale. It was unsigned, and the canvas, overcrowded with figures, had grown somber and blurred. Yet, queerly, Dickie liked the suggestion of powerful, half-naked men.
And more. This is painting a really good picture, pun intended.
needs a little more explanation.
I think we're getting a lot of explanation as it goes.
The foreign quayside street with slatternly women silent against a doorway, and the clumsy ship straining to swing out to the menacing sea beyond. All these things that he would never do. Strip and carry bales on his back, linger in strange doorways, and love hotly an animal woman who was unaccomplished and without grace and breeding. Yeah, dude, not with the women. Not with the animals.
Yeah, please not an animal woman. A animalistic woman, okay, but let's stay away from the animal women. Also, babe, if you want to strip, go down to the club. They'll hire you. You probably look okay. There's all levels.
Sounds like you take pretty good care of yourself,
Yeah.
generally speaking.
Got nice feet. Likes to wear the queen shoes.
Is that it? He collects drag queen shoes.
Oh, yeah.
And then embark on an evil-smelling Hulk that would have no human sympathy with his human ills.
Gonna ride around on Mark Ruffalo?
In your queen shoes.
I mean, one can dream, I suppose.
He had done a little yachting, of course, with the Ansties the year before last. His lips bent to a small, ironical smile as he reflected on the difference between a little yachting and the sinister fascination of that ugly, uninspired painting.
Dickie wants to get on a boat and go sailing with the big boys.
Slowly, he got up and went out. That is to say, he very precisely selected the hat, gloves, coat, and silk muffler suitable to wear, and as precisely put them on. Then he blew up the fire with an old-fashioned pair of worked brass bellows, turned out the lamp, told Mrs. Derrick, who would have died in his service every day from 8 to 8 o'clock, but would not crook a finger for him a minute before she entered the house, nor 5 seconds after she left it, that he was going for a walk and would certainly be back at 6:45, but probably before, and then went out.
Mrs. Derrick's like, I got work-life balance. I will be your servant. As long as you're paying me.
She works hard on the clock and fuck you off.
And then she's like, don't fucking talk to me. I don't know you on the streets.
For this was the natural way for Dickie Maybury to behave. At 7:20, he returned with a sheaf of newspapers, raucous and badly printed papers with smudged lines and a sort of speckled film over the illustrations and startlingly intimate headlines to every item of news. Dickie was trying to get into touch with life in the raw. At first, he was merely bewildered. He had read his daily newspaper, of course, though not with the stolid regularity with which the average man does so. And besides, it was preeminently a journal of dignity and good form, with an art column and a curio column and a literary page and a chess problem, and rather a delicately witty causerie by Rapier. It is to be feared that Dickie absorbed himself in these items first and altogether left out most of the topical and sensational news.
He had to play the Wordle and the connections.
Yep. Read the comics.
Let's be real. I don't read the New York Times that much, but I do my connections in my Wordle.
Now, however, he read it, and out of it, the horror of the underworld swayed up at him.
Oh, he about to doom scroll. Oh shit, here we go.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
This is early 20th century doom scrolling.
I mean, he basically is like, he doesn't really read the dark news. He kind of lives his life, on the surface, like a little ignorant of the world.
Yeah.
Which is what I've often said to you. I'm like, oh, I wish I could be that person and just kind of float through life, dancing through life.
I usually just play Fruit Ninja and Farmville, but...
Yeah, he's dancing. He's been dancing through life, and he's about to meet his Elphaba. They're just going to keep coming, y'all. I'm so sorry.
A twilit world where cisterns dripped and where homely, familiar things like gas brackets and braces and coal shovels were turned to dreadful weapons of death. The coroner and the broker's man and the undertaker sidled in and out of this world, dispassionately playing their frequent parts. Stunted boys and girls died for love like Romeo and Juliet, leaving behind them badly punctured cries of passion and despair that made Dickie wince as he read them.
So he's just reading the obituaries. And the
headlines, yeah. Pale, but fascinated, Dickie turned over a page and came to the great sensation of the moment. Is Ruth Oliver guilty? Dramatic developments. I wish you were dead, Lucas.
Damn, what Lucas do?
That's a fucked up headline.
Yeah. That'd make me read it, though. I'd be like, what the fuck Lucas do?
And who's Lucas?
Yeah. Also, is Ruth Oliver guilty? This is giving me strong Chicago vibes. It's like, Roxy, rock Chicago.
The account of the first day of the trial filled the entire page and dribbled excitedly over on the next. There was a photograph of Ruth Oliver accused of murdering her husband. You could see that she had gay eyes and a small...
That's why she murdered her husband. She had gay eyes. Moving on.
You could see that she had gay eyes and a small oval face and a child's wistful mouth. This must have been taken while she was very happy.
Now all I can see is Renee Zellweger, which is actually a perfect description of her. Like, small oval face, child's wistful mouth, because she has that little, like, poochy mouth, and, like, really bright eye, like, little, like, squinty but bright eyes. So yes, it is. It's just Roxy.
Dickie had never read through a murder trial before, but he did so now, every line of it, and the next day, and the next, until the woman who had pleaded not guilty was acquitted. And then he wrote to her and asked her to marry him.
Whoa, that was a leap.
I'm going to go with bold choice, Dickie.
Dickie. Don't read the murder section and then go, she sounds great.
Generally speaking, the headlines are not an advice column.
Yeah, he thought these were the personal ads. It's like, oh, she's not guilty. We're good. I learned so much about her by reading about the trial, too. She sounds cool.
That'd be weird.
I mean, it happens. Think of, like, Squeaky Froms, and didn't she like become obsessed with what's his fuck in jail? Charlie Manson.
Yeah.
Like, these are people, and like a lot of times that happens. Like people, the one serial killer in the 70s. There were many, but a lot of people became obsessed with these notorious serial killers that were very charming, and will like write them in jail and like want to marry them and try and arrange conjugal visits, and it's like, what the fuck?
But to a certain extent, I understand that a little bit more, because what you have is this dangerous person who you are fascinated with, but who is safely locked up. This to me seems more like someone who reaches out to OJ right after the trial and is like, hey, want a date?
I hear you're not guilty, apparently. So you want to go to TGI Fridays and get a margarita?
I hear you're really bad at putting gloves on. You want to
go to the Caribbean? You don't have to put gloves on there. I don't know.
I was going for a no glove, no love.
And he likes it in the raw. So, yeah.
Anyway,
this is cool. This story just took quite the turn. He read one article for a couple days and he goes, I will marry her.
And who would dare say of him now that he had feared to meet life in the raw? He did not know, of course, that his offer was one among 50, did not know that the curious state of mind he was in between trance and hysteria was a very common one to the public after a trial in which the elements are dramatic or the central figure is in any way picturesque. He did not even know how Ruth Oliver was being noisily besieged by pressmen and editors anxious for her biography, by music hall and theatrical managers willing to star her, by old friends curiously proud of association with her notoriety, by religious fanatics with their proofs of a strictly localized deity whose hand has clearly been outstretched to save you, by unhealthy flappers who had believed in her all along. Autograph, please.
Oh my God. Is this the, like, the source material for Chicago.
It's really genuinely just feeling like that.
It's like...
Clearly, they were thinking the same thing.
I mean, but this was written way before any of that. I don't know.
But wasn't Chicago based on
a play
something?
by the same name. It covered true stories from 1924 trials. So this was 2 years before that was written.
Yep.
Holy mother!
But it's the same sort of idea going around.
And the play was written in 1926.
26, yeah.
Holy shit! But yeah, I mean, literally, they just described the musical of Chicago. Like, get famous by killing your husband, and then everyone will want you. You'll be a star. You'll be a star. Kid, you'll be a star.
But not knowing, yet his letter, chivalrous without ardor, promised her a cool, quiet retreat from the plague of insects which was buzzing and stinging in the hot air all about her. My house is in a little square with trees all around it. It is shady and you cannot hear the traffic. I wonder if you are interested in old china and Japanese watercolors. Finally, I shall be very proud and happy if you can trust me to understand how deeply you must be longing for sanctuary after the sorrowful time you have been through. Sanctuary. She saw it open for her like a cloistered aisle between cold pillars. He offered her not the emotional variations intolerable to her weariness just then of a new devotion, but green-shaded rooms and the beauty of old things and a little old-fashioned gentleman's courtesy. So, ignoring the 50 other offerings of marriage which had assailed her, she wrote to Dickie Maybury and asked him to come and see her.
Damn, he got a hot date.
He went, still in a strangely exultant mood, in which his will acted as easily and yet as fantastically as though it were on a slippery surface. And if he had met Hal Burnham on his way back from his visit to Ruth Oliver, he would undoubtedly have swaggered a little. Nevertheless, he was thinking of Ruth, too, as well as his own daredevilry in thus seizing reality with both hands. Ruth's face, much older and more tormented than it had been in the photograph, had still that elusive quality which had from the beginning and through all the period of her trial haunted him.
That happens on Twitter, you know. The pictures don't always match up completely.
Yeah, it's catfishing. This is just pre-Tinder catfishing.
Yeah, she made sure the papers printed her graduation photo, and she's actually in like her 30s. Yeah.
It outraged his refinement that any woman with the high looks and the breeding of his own class should have been for any space of time the property of a coarse public. As his wife, the insult should be tenderly rectified. The poor child, the poor sweet child. He felt almost godlike with this new power upon him of acting on impulse.
Super turned on by being spontaneous. Okay, cool. This is going to go super well.
And he's got a little bit of white knight syndrome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's like, I will rescue this woman from her horrid life.
As for the peril of death, which for a short while had threatened her, that was a fact too stark and hideous for contemplation, even with Dickie's altered appetite for primitive adventure. They did not leave town after their quiet, matter-of-fact wedding at the registrar's.
Well, that escalated quickly. They just got married that day?
Or shortly thereafter.
Oh my God!
I mean, remember the period.
I know, but Jesus Christ.
Hey, want to get married? Sure, great, let's do it. When? How's tomorrow
Meet you
afternoon?
at the courthouse.
Tomorrow afternoon is good. 2:30. I was thinking 3:15. Even better.
Oh, man. All right. Well, here we go. I'm sure this will go really well.
A journey, in Dickie's eyes, would have seemed too blatant an interruption to his everyday existence, as though he were tactlessly emphasizing to his wife the necessity of a break and a complete change. She might even think, and again, poor child, that events should have rubbed into such super-sensitiveness that he was slightly ashamed of his act and was therefore hustling her and himself out of sight. So they went straight home. And Mrs. Derrick said, "Indeed, sir," when informed that her new mistress was the Ruth Oliver who had recently been acquitted of the charge of murdering her husband. She neither proffered a motherly bosom to Ruth, nor did she tender a haughty resignation from Mr. Mayberry's service, but said she hoped it wouldn't be expected of her under the new circumstances to arrive earlier nor to leave later, because she couldn't do it.
She busy. Mrs. Derrick got shit to do.
She's like, "No, it's fine. You're going to bring someone else into the house. That's cool. I got my job. I'm going to continue to work hard from 8 to 8, and the rest of the day, fuck off."
Mrs. Derrick is like boss bitch. She's like, work-life balance, baby.
Yep.
Like, long before people
Unflappable.
talked about that. She's like, nope. She's unflappable during the flapper times.
Well, you say work-life balance, bearing in mind she's actively working 12 hours a day, probably 7 days a week.
Yes, which was just like before they had laws against, like any kind of worker anyway. But
As for Dickie's friends, most of them were of the country house variety whom he visited once a year. Next autumn would show whether Ruth would be included in those week and weekend invitations. Meanwhile, those few dwelling in London marveled in a detached sort of way at Dickie's feat, liked Ruth, and pronounced it a shame that she should have been accused. Hal Burnham, the indirect promoter of the match, had returned to China.
now he can't even show off. He can't even be like, dude, look what I did. Look it, I did it. I'm living life in the raw. Look at my murderous wife. Okay, cool.
Allegedly.
Look at my merry murderesses. Not guilty.
Nobody was unkind. No word jarred. Life was padded in dim brocade. Ruth drew a long breath and was at peace. She was perfectly happy watching Dickie, and Dickie was at play again, enjoying his collection and his objets d'art, objects of art. And even his daily habits, with the added appreciation of a gambler who had staked but miraculously not lost them. Because, after all, anything might have resulted from his tempestuous decision at all costs to get into contact with naked actuality. All that had resulted was the presence in his house of a slim, grave woman who dressed her hair like a very skillful and not at all unconscious Madonna, whose taste was as fastidious as his own, and whose radiantly human smile had survived in vivid contrast to something quenched from her voice and shadowed in her eyes. A woman who, with a "may I" of half-laughing reverence, discovered that she could slip on to her exquisite feet one pair after another from his collection of the shoes of dead queens. It sounds like a ballade, Austin Dobson, I think, except that they're not all powder and patch queens.
Aw, he found a woman he can try on his queen shoes with.
Yes, dear, and the ones that don't fit you, well, I'll put them on.
I'll play with them, please.
Let's play dress up, let's play dress up.
Let's do it.
for she had an excellent feel of period, the texture of it, the fine shades of language, the outlook. Dickie hated people who had a blunt sense of period and in a jumbled fashion referred to old Venetian lace and the early Spanish school and Louise de la Valliere and a play by Wycherley indiscriminately as historical.
Okay. Snob.
So he doesn't like anachronisms
Yes.
in history.
Okay, Paris. Going back to Gilmore Girls.
Yes, Dickie had certainly been lucky, and like a wise man, he did not strain his star to another effort. The big thing, well, he had squared up to it, and truth to say, he had been fearfully shaky and uncertain about his capacity to do so when Hal had first roused his pride in the matter. Now, the little things, again, the little beautiful things, he had earned them. Anyway, he could not have a newspaper in the house nowadays for Ruth's sake. He owed it to Ruth to shut out forever those crimes of horror and fear and violence from the battering underworld.
Okay. We gotta shelter her from this. I'm assuming he's gonna miss some news, possibly.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm just
Yeah. Again, just because the glove doesn't fit.
Yep.
Acquittal just means there wasn't enough evidence in these days to execute her.
Yes. To prove her. Yes.
What I love about the way we live, Dickie, is that the just rightness of it all flows on evenly the whole time. One can be certain of it. Most people get it set aside for them in stray lumps, picture galleries and churches and a holiday on the continent, and all the rest of their time is just wrongness. Dickie wondered how much of her existence with Lucas Oliver had been just wrongness, or indeed all wrongness, but he never disturbed her surface of creamy serenity by referring to the husband who had been murdered by some person or persons unknown.
Yeah, we just don't talk about the past. We started dating and we're like, nothing exists before us. Let's just not talk about it.
That's what that is.
Yeah.
This is the relationship where you spend all your time pretending all of your exes don't exist.
Nothing happened before you met.
My life started when we met.
Sure it did. I mean, okay, that's very sweet, but you got baggage. We know you do. And we know she do.
We know she does.
Yeah.
Well, and his baggage is all like that repressed waspy baggage that
he's like, he kind of like has his little bubble.
Yeah.
And is comfortable in his little bubble. And
Yeah.
Yep. So he's not really aware of anything.
He and Ruth were the most harmonious of comrades, but never so far confidential. Perhaps Dickie overdid tact and non-intrusiveness, or perhaps Ruth, in her very passion of gratitude to him, was yet checked forever from passionate expression by the memory that her innermost love and her innermost hate, wrung into words, had once, and not so long ago, been read aloud and commented upon in public court and in half the homes of England. One evening, sitting together in front of the fire, they drifted into talk of their separate childhoods. There was a garden in mine, said Ruth, and in mine, a casino garden. His eyes twinkled. Palm trees like giant pineapples and flower beds in a pattern and a fountain. Oh, you poor little continental kitty. He shrugged his shoulders. The ways of the Lord are thoughtful and orderly. Why should he have wasted a heavenly wilderness of gnarled old apple trees on a small boy, who hated climbing. You can't have hated climbing if you hang that on your wall, she nodded towards the quayside picture. And surely you must have played Pirates and South Seas with your brothers.
Didn't we all? I played Pirates.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, we literally had the Lego sets.
Oh, yeah.
The pirate ship Lego sets.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that whenever we played, it was the pirates and the like the Navy. There were the like if you're doing cops and robbers.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me as kids. Ooh, actually, I'm curious about this. As kids, me and my friends, me and my brother, we always turned the pirates, the robbers, into the good guys.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
I'm curious if that is always true, or if there were people who played cops and robbers, and the cops were the good guys and the robbers were the bad guys. If there were people who played. So, hey, listeners, write in this week and let us know when you played those games, because everybody played some version of that, I assume.
Yeah.
Did you maintain the societal norm of law enforcement was the good guys, or did you have, at least in play, that little rebel in you that forced you to turn the robbers and the pirates and whatnot into the heroes of your story?
Yeah, I mean, I always, and maybe it's because we grew up in the Aladdin times, but like I always wanted to be the pirates. I always wanted to be like, the Bonnie and Clyde. Because that was the romantic thing. That was like, that's what they make movies about. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, like when you're doing Robin Hood, everybody wants to be the merry men, the
Robin Hood or the merry men.
The band of outlaws in the woods. Nobody wants to be the knights living in the castle.
Or John,
So yeah, I'm curious. Did anyone ever side with the Quotey Fingers good guys, or were you all the robbers too?
Ooh.
Be honest.
Yeah, be honest. I want to know.
Anyway, surely you must have played Pirates and South Seas with your brothers. I had none. A sister, that's all, who carried a sunshade. I had no sisters, but there was a girl next door and her brother. I note the jealous anguish of spirit, remarked Dickie, that you do not simply say a girl and a boy next door. Ruth's mischievous laugh affirmed his accusation. The wall was not very high. I kicked a foothold into it halfway up, and Tommy gave me a pull from the top.
Bet he did.
Tommy was ungallant enough to leave the wall to you? There were cherries in his garden, sweet black cherries, and only crab apples in ours. He might have filled his pockets with cherries and then climbed. No, I reject Tommy. He was unworthy of you. I may have been a horrid little casino brat. I may even have worn a white satin sailor suit with trousers down to my ankles. Ooh, Ruth winced. I may have danced too well, and I understood too early the art of complimenting ladies whose hats were too big and whose eyes were too bright. But once, after Annunziata Maddalena's nose had bled over this same sailor suit, I said it was my own nose because I knew how bitterly she was ashamed of her one bourgeois lapse.
That is a fucking name. Annunziata?
Annunziata.
Annunziata.
Or Annunziata Maddalena, yeah.
That is a name.
Tommy would have disowned her instead of owning the nose. Oh, I grant you the nobler nature, but it breaks my heart that you didn't have the wild English garden and the cherries and the grubby old dark blue jersey. If we had a kitty, Dickie began softly. his mouth puckered to its special elvish little smile. Then he met her eyes, lapping him round with such velvet tenderness that Dickie suddenly knew he was loved, knew that impulsively she was going to tell him so. And breathlessly happier than he had ever been before, he waited for it. I did kill my husband. They acquitted me, but I was guilty. It was an accident. I was so afraid. They would never have believed it could be an accident, but I had to, in self-defense.
He had it coming. He had it coming. Damn, he thought he was going to get I love you, and she just went, I'm a murderer. It's fine, though.
And now she had told him she loved him. Only Dickie was too numb to recognize the form her confession of love had taken. Love, as always, was, so no, that's not how the sentence should be read. The sentence should be read, and now she had told him she loved him. Only Dickie was too numb to recognize the form her confession of love had taken. Love, as always, was clamoring to be clearly seen, naked if need be, blood guilty if need be, but seen, and then swept up, sin and all, by another love big enough to accept this truth, also as essentially part of her. Ruth waited several seconds for Dickie to speak. Then she got up and strolled over to the picture and said, examining intently, as though for the first time, the woman in the doorway, I am not sorry, Dickie. And that is to say, I'm sorry, of course, if I've shattered an illusion of yours, but I can't be melodramatic, you know. Not even to the extent of using the word murderous on myself. If I hadn't killed Lucas, he would have killed you. So he was able to utter quite natural and coherent sounds. Dickie was surprised. Yes. But Ruth found that, after all, she could not tell Dickie much about Lucas. Lucas had not been a pleasant gentleman to live with. I hope not. That would make the murder extra weird.
That would make it way worse.
And there were things that Dickie was too fine himself and too innocent to realize. The only comprehension in this thoroughly well-groomed atmosphere of soft carpets and dim silken panels and miniatures and rare frail china might have come from the woman in the doorway of that incongruous picture, a woman sullenly patient, brutalized, but yes, her man might quite easily have been another Lucas. For that which Dickie had always thought of as mysterious, elusive, was to Ruth's eyes only sorrowful wisdom. Come here, Ruth. She dragged her eyes away from the picture, crossed the room, broke down completely, her head on his knees, her shuddering body crouched closely to the floor. When you've been frightened and have to live with it, and it doesn't even stop at night for weeks and months and years, one's nerves aren't quite reliable. They've no right to call that murder, have they? Have they, Dickie? When you've been afraid for a long time and there's no one you can tell about it except the person who makes the fear.
Well, this is making me sad if she's telling the truth.
Oh, and I assume she is.
I mean, we don't know, but yeah, because it sounds like he was an abusive piece of shit, but I guess we're gonna find out.
But Dickie was all that she had perilously dared to hope he would be at this crisis. He soothed her and healed her by his loyalty, promised, without her extorting it, that he would never tell a soul what she had just told him. Pixie shy, yet he spoke of his personal need of her. And more than anything else, she had desired to hear this. He mentioned some trivial, intimate plans for their unbroken, unchanged future together so as to reassure her of its continuance. He even made her laugh. In fact, for a last appearance in the role of gallant little gentleman, Dickie did not do so badly. He woke in the night from a bad dream with terror clinging thickly about his senses, but it did not slowly dissolve and release him as nightmare is wont to do. It remained, so that he lay still as a man in his winding sheet, afraid to move, remembering. I did kill my husband. Yes, that was it. In the room with him was a strange woman who had killed her husband.
Ding, ding, ding. Just realized all that.
Not Ruth, but a strange woman. How had she got into the room with him? She had killed her husband, and now he was her husband.
Wow, he's a little slow on the uptick,
Yeah.
ain't he?
I mean, shock.
Shock, but also, like, you proposed to a married motorist. You know.
Yeah.
Just saying.
He lay motionless, but his imagination began to crawl. What might happen to a man shut up alone in a house with a woman who murdered? His imagination began to race, and he lost control of it. Murder, with dry, sandy throat and a kicking heart. Dickie had to pay for his audacity in imagining he was big enough to claim life in the raw. Not big enough. Not big enough. The goblins of the underworld croaked at him in triumphant chorus. They capered. They snapped their fingers at him. They spun him down to where fear was. He had delivered himself to them by not being big enough.
It's always about size with men, isn't it?
Yeah. Mrs. Bigger had a baby. Which was bigger, Mrs. Bigger or the baby?
What?
The silly conundrum sprang at him from goodness knows what void, and over again he repeated it to himself, trying to remember the answer, trying to forget fear. Mrs. Bigger had a baby. He dared not fall asleep with the woman who had killed her husband alone in the room with him, alone in the house with him. A stir from the other bed, and one arm flung out in sleep. Dickie's knees jerked violently. His skin went cold and sticky with sweat. You fool, it's only Ruth. But she did it. She did it once. There are people who can't kill, and a few, just a very few, who can, and because they can, they are different and have to be shut away from the herd. But this woman, they've made a ghastly mistake. They've let her go free, and I can't tell anyone. Nobody knows except me and Ruth. Ah, yes, a quivering sigh of relief here. Ruth knows too. Ruth, my wife. Ruth means pity. There is no Ruth. There never was. Quite alone, except for a strange, strange woman. The kind that gets shut away and kept by herself.
He needs some melatonin and a cup of tea and a walk, and then you try and go back to bed, baby.
Yeah. Dude, just go bang yourself out of the house.
Yeah, you need to go bang yourself vigorously and get back to sleep.
To this bondage had Dickie's nerves delivered him. The custom of punctilious courtesy, so deeply ingrained as to mean in his case the impossibility of wounding another, decreed that some pretense must be kept up before Ruth. But with one shock, she divined the next morning the significant change in him and bowed her head to it. What could she do? She loved him, and she had overrated the capacity of his spirit. There had never been any courage, only kindness and sweetness and chivalry, all no good to him now that courage was wanted. She had made a mistake in telling him the truth. Suffering. She thought she had suffered fiercely with Lucas. She thought she had suffered while she was being ignominiously tried for her life. But what were either of these phases compared with the helpless bitterness of seeing Dickie, whom she loved, afraid of her? Even her periodic fits of wild, arrogant passion, which usually, when they surged past restraint, wrecked and altered whatever situation was hemming her in and left gaps for a passage through to something else. Even these had now to be curbed. Useful in hate, they were impotent in love. So Ruth recognized in her new humility. But when one day, seized by panic at having spoken irritably to her, Dickie hastily tried to propitiate her, to ingratiate himself so that she might spare him, might let him live a little longer, then Ruth felt she must cry aloud under the strain of this subtle torture. Why, he was her lover, her man, her child. In thought, her arm shaped itself into a crook for his head to lie there. Her fingers smoothed out the drawn perplexity of his brows. Her kisses were cool as snow on his hot, twitching little mouth. Her voice, hushed to a lullaby croon, promised him that nobody should hurt him. Nobody, while she was there to heal and protect. Sleep, baby, sleep. The hills are white with sheep.
Yeah, I don't like that nursery rhyme at all.
Over and over, she lulled herself with the old rhyme for comfort's sake. But Dickie she could not comfort, since, irony of ironies, she was the cause of his pitiful breakdown. Why, if she spoke, he started. If she moved towards him, he shrank. Yet still, Ruth dreamt that if he would only let her touch him, she could bring him reassurance. But meanwhile, his appetite was meager. The rare half hours he slept were broken with evil dreams from which he awoke whimpering. He did not care any more about the little beautiful things he had collected and grouped about him, but sat for hours listless and blank. His appearance a grotesque parody of the trim and dapper Dickie Maybury of the past. What could it matter how he looked with death slicing so close to him? "The master seems poorly late, don't he, ma'am? His digestion ain't strong. Perhaps something's as disagreed with him?" Thus Mrs. Derrick, taking her part in the drama as the simple character who makes speeches of more significant portent than she is aware of. Something had indeed disagreed with Dickie. In the slang phrase, he had bitten off more than he could chew. And the goblins were hunting him, whispering how she would creep up to him stealthily from behind, this woman who killed, and put her arms round him and put her fingers to his throat. That was one way.
Yeah, he needs to take a walk. Yeah. I love
Once around the block, count to 10. It'll all be fine.
He's having like the, not guilt, but he's having the like trauma dreams that she probably should be having if she did have to kill her husband out of self-defense. Maybe she already had them.
Oh, I'm sure she's dealing with them too.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting is, and in a really horrible way, what you have is a parallel, right? Because she was talking about how he was horrible
To her.
and causing all of this pain and fear, and he's the only person I could go to talk to. Because he was the only person who knew, and now the situations are reversed. She's the reason he's going through all of this through no fault of her own.
Yep.
And she's the only person he's allowed to talk to about it.
And vice versa. Because now, by him acting like that, he's causing her pain, and they're the only two that know, so they can only talk to each other. And they're not talking to each other, so.
Other ways there were, of killing him is what we're...
Yes. He's been imagining ways that she's going to kill him.
Other ways there were, of course. He must learn about them all so as to be watchful and prepared. Self-defense. Accident. Of course, they always said it was accident. He knew that now, for the evening crime sheets began to appear in the flat again, and Dickie studied them in place of the villanelles, the graceful essays, the belles lettres of his former choice. Ruth saw him with his delicate, shaking hands clutching the newspapers, his mild eyes bright with sordid fascination. He was ill, certainly, and brain-sick and oppressed, and she yearned for his illness to show itself a tangible, serious matter, a matter of bed and doctor and complete prostration and unwearied effort on the part of his nurse. My darling, he did everything for me when I most needed it, and now I can do nothing. It isn't fair. She stood by one of the open windows of the pretty Watteau sitting room. The lamps had just sprung to fiery stars in the blue, glamorous twilight of the square. The fragrance of wet lilac blew up to her, and a blackbird among the bushes began to sing like mad. The fist which was cruelly squeezing Ruth's spirit seemed slowly to unclench, and suddenly it struck her that things might be made worthwhile again for her and Dickie. After all, how insane it was for him to be huddling miserably, as she knew he would be, in the armchair of his study, gazing with forlorn eyes at the squalid columns which it had grown too dark for him to decipher. She had a vision of what this very evening might yet hold of recovered magic, if only she had the courage to carry out her simple cure of his head drawn down on her left breast, just where her heart was beating.
Boobs do tend to help with aching heart.
Fix most things, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dickie, it's all right, you know. It is only Ruth. I know you've been sitting with your bogies all the time the white lilac has been coming out. A faint smile lay at last on Ruth's mouth, and in the curve of her tired eyes. She went softly into the study. The door was open. Dickie sprang to his feet with a yell of terror as her hands came round his neck from behind. He clutched a revolver in his pocket and fired at random backwards. In the wall behind them was a round, dark mark of a merciful bullet. And... Dickie. Oh, Dickie, when you've been frightened and have to live with it, and it doesn't even stop at nights, do you understand now how it happens? They've no right to call that murder, have they, Dickie? And now, indeed, understanding that the awful act of killing could be, in a rare, once or twice, a human accident for the frightened little human to commit, understanding, Dickie was shocked back to sanity. Dear, dear Ruth. Why, this stranger woman was no stranger after all, but Ruth, his own sweet wife. Dickie was tired, and he knew he need not explain things to her. He laid his head down on her left breast, just where the heart was beating. The end.
Well, well, well.
You know there was a draft somewhere
Where she dies.
where he shot her.
Yes.
And those were her last words to him.
Yeah. Yeah. At first I was like, wait, did he shoot her?
I kind of thought that's where that was going.
Yeah, but like, yeah, I mean, that'll do it. Of like, this guy had been tormenting her, maybe confess something to her like that, like I've killed before or something, and she lived in terror, and then accidentally out of fear, turned around or something. Yeah, it's, ooh, that went places I was not prepared for.
That was a very sort of psychologically in-depth kind of progressive way of thinking about the world.
It also felt very contemporary, like even language-wise. I mean, there were some like beautiful words in there, but like not more so than like a lot of our authors continue to use. But like very contemporary in like thought of like how psychology works with fear and abuse and.
Well, and a story that we know contemporary audiences would connect with because people still love Chicago.
Yeah, except in this case, she actually is not guilty in that sense. Like she did kill him,
right?
But it was absolutely out of self-defense. Whereas in Chicago, those women did absolutely kill those people.
Sure, yeah.
Except for the one they end up hanging who didn't kill anybody. Yeah. But. Yeah, that was fun. I didn't know where that was going. At first, I was like, oh, it was about a man going on an adventure. And then it was like his adventure is marrying this woman who's clearly going to murder him. And then it just kept going.
Lots of twists and turns. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
I really enjoyed the writing. Yeah, I was like on the edge of my seat. I was like, ooh, what's going to happen? What's going on?
Yeah. So, in addition to my question about planned cops and robbers, I am curious if you have thoughts, dear listeners, about the way the story ends. Now, I can see the validity in both this ending and a version with just a tiny little change where he actually does shoot her. Do you think a story like this has more power to the reader if the woman in question dies and now this guy is forced to reconcile with what she had been saying all along that way, or leaving her alive, does that give the story at least some sense of hope that you can come out of this thing?
It could go both ways. I mean, it's much more tragic if she dies, because then it's just a vicious circle. Like, clearly the husband she killed out of self-defense had terrified her, whether it was confessing to her something like I murdered before or being abusive,
right?
Or, whatever. Then it would just be a vicious circle. So it's like, now who's going to kill him? Like, who's he going to confess to that?
Well, and certainly we do know that is true. That trauma tends to be a circle.
Of course,
like trauma begets trauma, abuse begets abuse.
But you can heal, which is a true thing, if you find someone that understands you. And now it seems like they have an understanding, so maybe they can heal together.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it tells a different story at the end. Though you get the same story, you walk away with a different feeling.
Yeah, I guess it's the slightly uplift versus the slightly
like, oh shit. Yeah.
Anyway, I enjoyed that.
I really liked that. Yeah.
Well, I think that's all I've got for this week. Do you have any final sort of parting shots?
No, I guess the wicked die alone.
Yeah. That's everything for this week. Go ahead and write in to let us know your thoughts on those questions, and anything else that might be lingering in your brain that you want to share with us.
You know what? This all did tie into Wicked pretty well, because you think someone's bad, and then you actually hear why they're the way they are. And sorry, guys. The wizard and I, Dickie and I. Just go bang yourself vigorously. You'll be fine. I'm done now.
Okay.
I was just wrapping up my thoughts. Popular. I am a sentimental man.
I can wait.
Dear old shiz. I'm done now. I'm actually done now. I'm just going through the fucking soundtrack. Cast recording. You can speak now.
Can I? Because like the last 4 times I've tried. Right. So, message us. Let us know the answers to those questions. You can send that email to 5050hoursproduction@gmail.com or any of our social media. Just look for Campfire Classics Podcast. And when you write in, use this week's secret passcode, which is bang yourself with vigor.
It's just good advice.
So that's all from us. And until next week, this has been Campfire Classics, where we try to read those books that look really good on your shelf.
Y'all thought I was going to sing a Wicked song, didn't you? But instead I'm going to say, he had it coming, he had it coming, he had it coming.